I have a computer here. I guess I'm brain dead.
I know that feeling.
It's not. So good evening, everyone. My name is Nancy Knowles, and I am affiliated with Art Center East. We're hosting this reading by Jennifer Reimer tonight. We're really excited to have her with us. I just wanted to welcome you all, the folks that are here in person, the folks that are with us online, and just remind us that we are here in La Grande on the ancestral homelands of the Umatilla, Cayuse, Walla Walla, and Nez Perce peoples. And we feel very committed to learning and partnering and continuing to uplift the voices of our local people in a community based in this landscape. I'm also just wanting to remind folks, you all probably know that Art Center East is here in town. We are a 501c3 member-supported nonprofit providing classes and events to the community here in town. And we're just really glad you could be here tonight. And I'm going to pass the computer to Amelia, who's going to introduce our featured reader tonight.
La batuta. Me pasa la batuta. I think that's what it's called. Passing the computer.
Right.
The official words in Spanish. I'm pleased to, my name is Amelia Edinger. I think I know everybody here and most people online. Thank you for being here today. And I am pleased to present Jennifer A. Reimer. She is an assistant professor of American Studies and a coordinator for the MFA program at Oregon State University, Cascades. If I say anything that is incorrect, you correct me, Jennifer. Jennifer has a PhD in ethnic studies from UC Berkeley, an MFA from the University of San Francisco, and her works mainly deal with, her works of poetry deal with race, gender, and migration. She has multiple scholarly and literary publications, including where she's going to read from tonight, Keski, which is a book of poetry published this year. It's hot off the press. In fact, it's going to be available in the first part of October. And can you show the book? Further forward, oh, further back. Further back. Put it by your face. We can see it.
There we go. There we go.
Okay, Cass is beautiful. Believe me, it's gorgeous. You can see part of it. Anyway, so without further ado, I present to you Jennifer Reimer. There it is.
Hey!
Isn't that beautiful?
What's the press?
This is early press.
Yeah.
Right. Mute
Okay.
that, Nancy, for an introduction.
Okay, I'm going to mute myself and then we're going to unmute Jennifer.
Hello, everyone. Can you hear me? Awesome. Thank you so very much for that very generous introduction. Thank you to Art Center East, to Nancy and Amelia for inviting me to be with you tonight. I am so very sorry not to be in the same space physically as you. My teaching schedule got changed at the last minute, and today's the first day of class, and I had a class that went until 6 p.m. today. And my boss was like, no, you can't cancel class on the very first day of the new term. Not when we have freshmen who've never taken a class before, and this is their first introduction to university life. So you guys very generously allowed this Zoom option, which is less than ideal, but I appreciate it nonetheless. And so thank you for that land acknowledgement statement. I am sitting here in my home in Bend, Oregon, and I also want to acknowledge that the land in which this house is, used to belong to the Confederated Tribes of Warm Springs, which includes a lot of different tribes, including the Wasco people. And so I always like to begin by acknowledging that I am sitting here definitely on stolen territory, and hopefully be able to transport us tonight to some other locations. My background that I chose for this reading is the location around which many of the poems in the new book take place. And that's a place that I used to spend a lot of time when I was living in Turkey for about 5 years. Before we start, I just wanted to double check on my timing. Guys, how much time are you giving me to talk about poems tonight? As much time as I want? Okay, well, how about this? I will get started and then you just let me know when I need to shut up and let others speak.
We said 30, like 30 to 40.
Oh, wow. Okay,
So
great. We can tell some
but
stories.
you do what you want to do there.
Great. So I'll actually start by reading some prose poems from very first little tiny book I wrote that was published in 2003 by Quail Press. And it's called The Rainy Season Diaries. Even the heat has left our house. Words unwrapped themselves from silence. You ask me, what is the rate of occurrence? You ask me, how are you spent? But we are engaged in the practice of survival, prisoners in a world that disappears again. I traced your scars, even though they have become perfectly soundless, closer to what can be saved. Now I can say this. I can say this because you are not here, yet the gate trembles, and I think you must be. We fall asleep on a fault zone, where surface traces mistake wind for hair, voice for hunger. Down where motion originates, we find clean fractures and the gentle dip and sway of bedrock. We are plates sliding past each other, the intersection of earth with artery. You and I always apologize before going to bed. We rarely argue. Every night you place a glass of water on the nightstand that you never drink. In the morning, a thin layer of dust has settled on the surface. I'll read a few more from this book, but I wanted to say just a little bit. There's a lot going on in this book, but one of the things that I was dealing with was a major breakup of someone that I had been living with for some time. And so there's a lot about domestic space and sort of what happens to the domestic space as a relationship is falling apart around it. I was also in graduate school at the time and really frustrated by academic writing and the kind of academic texts that I was expected to be interested in. And my way of dealing with what I thought was a lot of bad writing about really interesting topics was to use some of that language and collage it into poetry. So that's going on as well. This is a lesson that I should not forget. After all, where is a bucket of water to be raised if not from the ground? What was sudden, drying dirt? Rain buried seeds. No, you said, it was birds, an accident of nesting. More than once we have found our laundry in the trees, a feather in the hall. Every night we say we are too tired. Rain breaking surfaces. We sleep on opposite sides, dream of petaled light. That poem was one of a series that I took to Oaxaca, Mexico, and workshopped with a series of female writers during a 3-week event called Mujeres Poetas en el País de las Nubes, which means female poets in cloud or sky country. And as part of that work, a good friend of mine, Gabriela Spears Rico, translated an earlier version of that poem that I just read into Spanish. And so I would also like to read the version in Spanish. Si vamos a discutir un problema, deberíamos de empezar desde la realidad y no desde las definiciones. Como una cubeta de agua, por ejemplo. ¿De dónde se levanta si no es del suelo? Lo que fue, tierra rápidamente se seca, semillas enterradas en la lluvia. No, me dijiste, fueron pájaros. Un accidente al construir un nido. No hubo absolutamente nada como el amor o el odio sin causa ni razón. Todas las noches decimos que estamos muy cansados. La lluvia corrompe las superficies. Dormimos en lados opuestos. Sueños en pétalos de luz. Pardon my accent in Spanish. You have been betrayed by stories. You say this house will never be made of gingerbread. It does not appear to fall apart as the result of huffing and puffing. Wrongly imagining knight errantry was compatible with society, we have converted the poet into a wage laborer. Magic beans are not, if you recall, something we can buy around here. And there are rules about wishing for more wishes. Only the mirror knows the price of transformation. A pot of boiling water, a cat curling into sun. We begin with surface tension, the measurements made against water. Tell me again about lenses and angles and where the light falls softest. Somewhere between your heart and your cock, there's an entire continent. You say this is film 101, close-ups for emotional intensity. Yet I supply the circling movements, clutch the delicate articles of faith, a tesseract to collapse the possible and the not so, but who knows? Everything matters. How the camera connects to what we cannot, curves to horizons leading to somewhere where aches cease. She remembers his eyes while she sleeps, pendulous and forging, that unfinished look at the intersection of all the earth's surfaces. Somewhere he dives the great trenches, somewhere he remains faithful, a tectonic prayer against weakening boundaries. But here, where they have converged, there are no dry valleys, no empty seas. She has walked the distance between crust and core and knows the basic strength of rock, the sculpted shapes of erosion. How many of the strange places are even more striking because most people don't know they exist. In her sleep, she conjures those suffocated adagios of islands. She, against all proof of movement and geometry. She remembers the willing disarmament, the threshing. Tell me again, she says in sleep, who redeems the scarred seabed, the salt wind, the broken devices of navigation? Beneath our once pacific grace, still the burdened rise of flesh and bone, this ruined paradise of breath. And that's how I like to characterize a terrible ending to a very dramatic relationship with another poet. So I'll read a little bit now from Keshke, and this is the book that Amelia spoke so kindly about. I'm very excited and honored to have this book coming out in just a couple of weeks with Airlie Press. So let me tell you a little bit about this book and about the stories behind it. I spent 5 years of my life living and teaching in Turkey. I was based in Ankara, not in Istanbul. So Ankara, the capital, located in the center of Anatolia, which is the part of Turkey on the Asian continent and not the European side. And I was there in the years between 2012 and 2017. And so if you follow, sort of world events, you'll know that that was a particularly rocky time in recent Turkish history. And I wrote this book specifically right around and in the aftermath of the summer of 2006. And on July 15th, 2016, the time, July 15th, 2016, there was a coup attempt that took place in Turkey. We felt it both in Ankara and in Istanbul. So there was, things happening both in Ankara and in Istanbul. And I was in Ankara at the time on the university campus where I lived and worked. And they were bombing various government buildings that were not terribly far from our university campus, and could feel the buildings reverberate with the sounds of the bombing. So so a lot of this book was written during and after that, when I was sort of thinking through what it meant to be living there during this moment of incredible tension. And what I like to say before I read from this book is to note that I don't have a genetic connection to Turkey. My family didn't come from there. And when I speak about experiences in Turkey, and when I talk particularly about the politics and my reaction to them, I like to remind people that I'm only speaking for myself. I'm not speaking for Turkish people. And, my experience of the coup attempt and what happened afterwards was also very different than what it was like for Turkish citizens. So as a holder of an American passport, there was always going to be a way for me to get out. No matter what eventually was going to happen, I knew that at some point there would be a way out for me. But in those immediate days and weeks following the coup attempt, my Turkish friends and people in Turkey did not have those same privileges, and so they experienced the precarity of these moments in ways that were very different from how I experienced them. But that is the sort of framing event for this book. As a result of the coup attempt, which happened in Ankara, I got out of the city. And of course, we couldn't fly or go anywhere internationally. The borders were closed. At that point, they were closed for everyone, regardless of where you had a passport. And so I was looking at, where are some flights where I could go and get out of the city and get to someplace peaceful. And I remembered that I had been on a kind of crazy weekend adventure a year or so before, and that someone had taken me to this little town that was only accessible by a very small minibus and then on foot down on the Mediterranean coast. And I thought, wow, maybe if I could get down there, that would be a great place to kind of hide out and try to process what was going on in the country. So that's what I did. I left Ankara, got on a flight to Antalya, which is a major tourist city on the southern Mediterranean coast of Turkey, and then took a series of small buses to a little vacation village that's called Olympos. And Olympos is interesting because it has a history of being this sort of hippie tourist destination, particularly in the 1990s in Turkey. So it has a lot of bungalows. It has a lot of sort of all of the paraphernalia of international hippiedom. It was famous with like Australian and Dutch tourists for a long time. Like most things in Turkey, after the rise of Erdogan and his sort of nationalist agenda and the unrest in Turkey, foreign tourism had been declining. And so it was a lot of younger Turkish sort of countercultural people, a lot of backpackers and people who don't shower regularly. So anyways, that's where I found myself in what ended up being several months right in the aftermath of the coup attempt. And I went down there with a big thick anthology of poetry and some notebooks. And so what you're seeing in the background is part of the landscape of this place. During those adventures, I ended up spending a lot of time on a boat, and weeks sort of on this boat off the coast of Turkey. And alongside that experience, earlier in the year and then sort of later after this event, I had been traveling around that region, and I kept sort of coming into contact with places in this Mediterranean basin that claim to be so-and-so XYZ spot from Homer's The Odyssey, also places from the Iliad. And one of them that really struck me was on a trip to Malta the month before the coup attempt. I was in Malta with my best friend who had met me to go on a BFF trip. And, you know, we ended up on this tour that showed us what was they claimed to be where Calypso from the Odyssey lived. And experiencing that site sent me back into that text, and I started rereading some of these stories. And I was particularly interested in the way that Calypso comes up in book 5 of the Odyssey. And I started thinking about the story that we're told about her, and surrounded by the geography where all of this was meant to unfold, and thinking about the role that she plays in the Odyssey, I started to think about what it might be like to write an epic poem that partly involves rethinking this figure of the goddess who supposedly takes in a shipwrecked Odysseus, right, the hero of the tale. He shipwrecks on her island, and she saves him and his men. And the way that the Odyssey tells it is that Odysseus ends up staying there against his will for 7 years and living in a cave with Calypso. And finally, he gets to the point where he's so sad and he misses his wife and he's so homesick that Calypso finally says, okay, if you're that sad, I'll help you get back home. And then she helps his men build rafts, and she gives them provisions and sends them on their way to continue their event-filled journey right back to Ithaca. But I was rereading the text, and I was thinking, and I was like, you know, what we know about this character Odysseus from Homer is that he's very charismatic. He's supposed to be good looking. He's very good with his words, right? He negotiates peace for the end of the Trojan War. And how likely is it that this attractive, charismatic, good-looking young man ends up on this island where, you know, the person who welcomes him is, by all accounts, this beautiful goddess, right? Immortal. And he stays 7 years against his will? Like, there's something there that just wasn't tracking for me, right? That the story that we're getting was not one that I really believed. I found it hard to believe that this man stayed for 7 years sleeping with Calypso out of obligation, or was held against his will. And I just started thinking more about, like, well, what does it mean to be positioned as, you know, the woman in between, right? Who's your stop on the way back to your wife. And what does that say about the position of the goddess and the position of women? And so that is how this 25, the poem Keşke is written in a series of 25 poems. And I'm trying to think through some of those questions, and then sort of drawing on my own experiences of living on a boat and being in this region. So because we have so much time, it's fun to give such a thorough backstory and explanation to this book. And of course, if you have questions or you want to talk about that, or tell me how I'm misinterpreting the classics, I would love to hear from you. In addition to the 25-piece kind of epic poem, there's also a series of prose poems in this book, and many of them deal directly with my experience of being in Turkey after the coup. And this is the first one of that series, and it's called The Day After the Failed Military Coup. The day after the failed military coup was hot. Everyone stayed up until 6 a.m., bleary-eyed from live streaming Al Jazeera or BBC, We blinked into the bright July. Some hours later, your body remembers the sound and feel of the Parliament explosion, like the first plane, first tower. Another hot day, both Tuesdays, by the way. 2 days after the failed military coup, you cry over 9/11 at last, the smoke and ash, the last train from lower Manhattan filled with ghosts, the bodies falling through memory, always falling. Far away in Anatolia, where summer smells like scorched sweet grass and pine, you remember the smell of steel and death, how you walked past it twice a day for months. On the day after the failed military coup, you're still thinking of Keshke and feel guilty about this. You remember Andrew's first apartment in the West Village in 2001, and you wish, Keshke, Keshke, Keshke. You talk about poetry and why you don't want to talk about it. On the day after the failed military coup, you drink because turkey breaks and you don't want anyone to know. 2 days after the failed military coup, you've decided, but you don't know it yet, and you might as well finally. I want to say a little bit about the word keşke. Keşke is a Turkish word, and if you translate it into English roughly, it translates to something like if only. It's an expression of wish or longing. And I had a friend who taught me this word, and it was also right in these weeks leading up to the coup attempt. And I was really taken with the word, the idea that in Turkish, there's one single word that expresses this complex notion of like, if only things were different, then something, something, something. And also that expresses an idea of wish. And so the wishing kind of worked into ideas that I was thinking about, goddesses and spells and all of this stuff. And I also just thought it was really cool. And I knew when I started thinking about this word that there was going to be a book that was going to come out of this word. So here's one of the Keşke poems, and this is Keşke 4. And these are kind of hard to read aloud because there's a lot of formal stuff going on, but I'll do my best. She swims in visible worlds, matter, common tongue, length of bay, leaves fallen, dry, pages turn, margins to letter. She reads absence, a space you haven't filled yet. With breath, counts 4, 1, before you tumbled me, 2, swallow's nest, 3, a document in madness, 4, you who long for things, past replica pirate ship, wrecked ruins of naming conventions. She dreams that she speaks the lines of the sea, deciphers currents code, that the view is more splendid if you would come. 4 days for breath, space, we have made for more. Each century decoding begins again. She, star's skin, sees surface lit, back wards against, incessant click clack, water and air constellate her body, shell, wave, spray of foam, passage through time, gate, way, cast a wayward glance, a way, word, spell, a way out. Nothing in half an emotion is keşke. Why she must imagine. Shadows, water, through it, all ways. If anyone's ever been to Istanbul, you'll know that sort of the main drag through downtown Istanbul is called Istiklal Caddesi, and it's a main sort of meeting point for people, and there's shops and restaurant and bars and clubs all down this street. And this is a poem called Istiklal Caddesi. Can you name every girl you've kissed? You write this down so you won't forget to ask next time. List yours on the back of a Turkish Airlines boarding pass, astonished at columns, forgetting and remembering in ballpoint. There's another list too, longer than you thought. A surprise, really. The picture posted, now 5 years old. It's starting to show, you said. Cycle of account for, cycle of causality. Yes, things that happened long ago still matter. Boxes in a garage in California, pieces of languages you knew, now words, mostly nouns, a certain mouth rhythm. You don't know the past tense for keşke, wind for hair or shapes for words, how you liked the sound of the call to prayer when it all came down to the horrible dress you would not have wanted to wear, past conditional, past continuous. She was waiting. Now, again, the Bosphorus, this channel, this throat-choked city, wait here for no one. Even the textile man will not remember your name. Why should you taste like Kalajik Karasa when, by all accounts, you don't drink wine? You watch the ferries come and go, swoop of swallow, plum tree against old stone. Tonight, tense change. You will put on a dress and dance on a rooftop, and you will kiss a man you do not love, who probably loves you, and you will wish it would have been. This is another keşke poem, and it's also written during the holy month of Ramadan, which was another thing that was happening in the weeks leading to and after the coup attempt. This is Keşke 6. She dawns, pink-washed pale, leaves the city, sleeping, streets, garbage and glass, still blue, Bosphorus, sullen cement cellars, resting, architecture, forms, chai drenched before sun breaks, nights hold on, hours stretch thin, light expands, contracts. Heart centers hunger, now familiar routes. Again, light fills lack, exposes what will not pass lips. Keşke breath becomes the Ramadan light of June, beneath will as wish. Shatter this fast, sea absorbed, light fades lavender, still absent words, empty words, glass words, waits. A week after the failed military coup. A week after the failed military coup, you go south to Olympos. You're camped out with the book and all your keşke, vine-covered, ruins fallen into green river water. A week after the failed military coup, some of your friends are banned from leaving the country. Word has just come through that you're exempt. You feel guilty for having worried over an upcoming trip to Scotland to celebrate your birthday. You meet Tarkin from Diyarbakir, who sells mussels on the beach, and you feel utterly alone for the first time in 4 years. You'll feel guilty for thinking about this too. A week after the failed military coup, broad-faced women in headscarves are making gözleme, observation. Do you remember? You eat on the beach. The Turkish word of the day is insan hakları, human rights. Bahane means excuse. Korkak means coward. He talks of Syrian refugees before he fucks you. The failed military coup doesn't give you perspective. You don't need prayers. A week after the failed military coup, the water is warm. You think about Keshke when you float, suspended in salt and sea, absorbing differences in light transmission efficiency, code names. A week after the failed military coup, Turkish words for freedom and democracy tattoo the headlines. You don't know the word for disappointment or what is inverse of Keshke. And while I was reading that, I decided I wanted to read the next one in that series, which is called A Month After the Failed Military Coup. And I wasn't going to read this one originally because it's a little bit weird. Into this prose poem, I've also interspersed quotations from the screenplay of the animated film How to Tame Your Dragon. I'm happy to talk about why that film and why that at another time or later. A month after the failed military coup, you're back on the southern coast, a year older. Oh, for the love of, I was a coward, I was weak, I wouldn't. At Olympus Orange Bungalows, they learn your name. It's too hot to run, so you swim in the sea, returning to rhythms from other decades. Astrid punches. The sea holds a diaper, a used tampon, a replica pirate ship, small fish that bite your feet if you stay still long enough. This is not a metaphor. So many spectrums of light. You, Keshke. A month after the failed military coup, the Turkish word of the day is bedava, free, as in gratis, not libre, as in ikitani alana birtani bedava, as in buy democracy, get dictatorship for free. You finish the book as the binding falls apart. It's 12 days north of hopeless. 860 pages of postmodern American poetry between you and the failed military coup. Everything we know about you guys is wrong. The dinner bell rings at 2000. She drops the butt of her axe on his chest, and that's your alarm rings at 0900. 1800 is 8 a.m. in California. For everything else, you know enough Turkish to know that most people mostly talk about dragon classifications, strength class, fear class, mystery class. All conversations always begin with about the dragons. You are consistently, constantly, this reclusive dragon inhabits sea caves and dark tide pools. What happens to the leftover food? Do you live here? You tell yourself that you sing along so you don't forget the sounds of America, but it's the sound of your own voice that you're afraid of forgetting. I do not want rice. The country is in a 3-month state of emergency. You have been sober for 11 days. Extremely dangerous, extremely dangerous. Kill on sight, kill on sight, kill on sight. This might be a metaphor. Never engage this dragon. State of emergency means your only chance, hide and pray it does not find you. I would like to read 2 more, if that's okay. Thank you, Lindsay, for all of your, you're being so active in screen. I love it. I know, who doesn't love dragons? I mean, honestly. This is another poem, sort of a prose poem, and it's called Neshko Bir. And Neshko Bir is the name of the boat that I was on during this summer, that summer. Neshko Bir. You learn the rhythm by the 3rd day. Erai raises and lowers the anchor. Mehmet drives the boat, and you write, Keshke. Remember the sound of water taxis, boat to boat. In the evening, air haunted by the taste of salt, skin. The sun sets port side, grilled shrimp and raka. How could we help having more than enough keshke? Andriake Harbor in the morning, you watch sea turtles, fish, things spoken as unspoken, give us away. You broke your vow of sobriety to dance barefoot. That green before green before green we perceive as air. Do you like American music? Your best friend texts, you are every music video ever. Why then, on the fourth day, Roman ruins slide starboard, you wonder if you could come for days. The passengers mistake you for crew. Neshko, named for his dead grandfather. His father dead when he was 3 years old. No, he doesn't. Tell you all about it. The old house, working the boat at 13, the uncle, the drunk stepfather who beats his mother, who is angry today because he did not come home. Last night you slept on the boat. He wakes you early. The Turkish word of the day is nefis, part of speech, adjective. Nefisti, that was delicious. You tell yourself that someday soon you'll learn past tense. And I'm going to finish with one of the last in the Keshke series, and this is one that's really directly dealing with the Calypso part of the Odyssey. And there are some lines in here that are taken directly from Emily Watson's sort of feminist reinterpretation translation of the Odyssey that came out right around the same time, I think 2015. Maybe one of you knows. So this is Keshke 23. She, a slips undercover, deathless, ageless goddess. Keshke, after, affect, slant of eye, swears, breath, gutted. I will not plot more. Mortal diversion, distraction. Here, a new valley, deep ruin, again. Rose dawn, broken silhouette, the Finnike marina, ships, sails, distant. Now she routes coastal, caravan of gifts, wine, water, robes, and so much else too. Cliff, wish, face, demre, silence, ending. Yes, I am happy. Yes, I am sure. She lies between what is near, far, away, Ankara, or this dream valediction. I am always here, waiting. Banabak, Banabakma. But she looks, dissolving Keshke, this sea, salt, wind, pillared wish. Thank you so much for having me virtually tonight. It was really fun. I hope I didn't take too long. Also, cheers. I'm joining you all for a drink tonight. I'm drinking a glass of red wine.
Thank you so much. I'm just gonna move myself up to the front in case we have some questions. And I'm not exactly sure how this is gonna work, trying to get between
This
Are-
one could give me an eye.
Okay,
Like-
yeah.
Well, I think I can hear everyone perfectly
You
fine.
you can hear us now, and I think the people in the room here can't hear you very well because you're not on the speaker. So
Right now.
I think what we'll try to do is ask the question and then switch the the muting so that you can be heard here in the room. So I guess what I'd like to do is open it up for questions. Do folks want to ask something? And maybe what I'll do is just give you the computer and you can ask it, unless you want me to ask it.
Yeah, pass the computer.
You
around.
could just pass the computer. Yeah. Anybody have a question?
Hi, sorry, we have to know why How to Train Your Dragon.
Okay, great. Let me
Wait,
get,
okay.
you're gonna wait before you speak. We're gonna switch back. Let me mute myself.
So yeah, I was sort of in this weird flirtation with someone at the time, and a good mutual friend had characterized us as the two main characters from that film, which I hadn't seen yet. And my friend said, "Oh my gosh, you have to watch this movie because this person is so much like this little boy who can't get his act together and is trying to do stuff but is completely hopeless and fails all the time, and he's up against this super competent badass woman." So I actually had watched it and I was thinking about like this relationship playing out, but also that person and I had a whole conversation about dragons and what we would name dragons if we had them as pet dragons. And then I was down in this geography, sort of realizing that whole situation was not going to go in a way that I wanted, and realizing that the geography of the place, people sometimes had described as being like a dragon's back or a dragon's spine, the shape of the mountains. And so there was all of these dragon things sort of floating around, and I just thought it would be fun to throw some dragons in there. But also as a way of talking about like the ineptitude of men in general. Does that make sense? The like international timeless ineptitude of men, living or fake, real or animated, regardless of national origin, who always, and it always seems to be, and I know so many situations where these inept men like are sort of paired with or paired off against a woman or a girl who's super competent. So that was something else I was thinking about. Also, again, thinking about Odysseus, who, although good looking, can't seem to get back home, which wasn't really that far away. And he keeps screwing it up, right? And he only gets back to his wife because his wife waited for him and was clever and competent. And all of these clever and competent, like gendered female deities help him along the way. Does that answer your question?
Oh my goodness. Yes, we were sitting here laughing. Thank you so much. That was great. Is there another, do we have another question? I'm gonna, and I don't know, I'm looking also at Lindsay and Rose. Lindsay, you unmuted. Do you want to ask a question?
Yes, she said this, but I was taking notes and I got a little bit sloppy here. I taught today too, so I was trying to straighten out everything at the same time. That's why I was a little bit late with the online class. You said that there was a town, and I didn't get the name written down, that you spent most of your time where they had the bungalows and it was kind of like a hippie dome. And this is, what year was that? That was around the first year you were there then, 2012, right?
It was in 2016.
Oh, it was later then. Okay.
And the
And
name of the town, Olympos, right? I mean, in
Okay.
Turkish, it sounds more like Olympos, but
okay, yeah, I wrote down Olympos, P-R-O-S. I don't know if that's correct. It's okay.
so, but there's like 25 places in the Mediterranean that call themselves like Olympos, as in the Mount Olympos where the gods were. And this is one of them. But again, the link to this history, right?
Mm-hmm. Yeah. Well, I'm writing some introductions for the publisher that did my last book, And they're releasing a number of classics, one of which is Ulysses by James Joyce. And I thought, ooh, I might weave a little bit to the intro, because that's what it's based upon. And that's interesting what you brought up about the women and the men, because as far as I've read, Joyce was kind of a chauvinist, but his wife, Nora, was based upon, what's her face? I'm spacing
Molly?
it out in the novel, the Bloom's wife.
Molly, right? It's Molly?
Yeah. Huh?
Is it Molly?
Yes, Molly Bloom. Anyway, and I read some of the letters that she would write to him, and she used that same voice that Molly Bloom uses in. So he had kind of a competent wife too. That was kind of a wild one. So
Well, I mean, so did Milton, right?
really,
Milton
I don't know
couldn't
as
have
much
written-
about Milton's personal life.
I mean, that's maybe not the most relevant example. Like this, there's a lot of conversations about, these super competent women who play a huge role in the success of like the boy genius or the male genius, and the
Mhm.
attention and the accolades always go to the man.
And sometimes they Helicon 9, which is no longer around, but it was a journal put out by a woman in Kansas City, and she had a whole series of articles in it from women about how both female artists and writers, and well, they know about T.S. Eliot, or not Eliot, Fitzgerald, how Zelda wrote some of that. Well, there are some artists that their beloved or wives did part of the work too and didn't get credit for it. So
Or, they are the ones doing the domestic labor that allows for the man to have the time and space to do the writing, right?
Mhm.
And in this sort of disastrous relationship that I had with a poet that I wrote about a lot, I mean, that was one thing I reflected on a lot in later years. Was he went on to he's very well known in contemporary poetry. Okay, so that's a small pool, but within that small pool, like, he's a big fish. And I think about those 5 years when we were together, and like, who was doing the cleaning and the cooking and the laundry that gave him the space that he needed to write his first book, which won an award, et cetera, et cetera. And I don't, the problem with talking about this is that people say, oh, that's sour grapes. Oh, you're just bitter. Oh, you're not over it. And it's not, I don't think that's the conversation we should be having.
It's the truth. It's the truth. They can't take it.
But we just need to talk about the fact that women's labor allows for the success of like the so-called male genius. Just a conversation that I want to have over wine and dragons.
I can't say too much. He's in the other room.
Oh, I'm married now, and
Uh-huh.
my husband is over there happily, taking care of dinner so that I can do this.
Okay, you guys have me just doing some stuff. Good for you. I don't. So, well, anyway,
Okay, I
yeah.
think we have one more question here in the room, and I'm also watching my battery life and thinking that might be our last question. I have a cord I'll use if I need to.
Hey, Ron.
Hello.
Hi.
Okay. So I'm curious about the combination of the prose poems and the Keshka poems that you talked about as being, highly formal. Is that, I mean, it seems like opposite ends of the spectrum kind of. So I'm curious about, was that an intentional choice? Also, I'm curious about how they're ordered in the poem. And then a secondary question is, I noticed, at least with the prose poems, that they were second person, right? And so I wondered if you could just talk a little bit about how that came about and stuff. It's because it's very interesting. Thank you.
Yeah, thanks so much. Those are really fabulous questions. Let's see. So I knew once I sort of got myself into this whole thinking about Keshke, I knew that I wanted that to be in this, yeah, like you said, highly formal way. I decided it would be serial and that I would ultimately break it up in the book. And so when I was writing each of those poems, I kind of knew what they were going to do ultimately. But there was other things that I was going through and experiencing that to me required a different form. And what I can say about that is that, you know, it's kind of like an intuition. And, you know, you sound like you might be a writer from the way that you talk, and you probably know that there's just like, sometimes it's just the subject matter is telling you, right, how it wants to be written. And so I knew that these prose pieces that were more immediate in the contemporary moment and not gesturing toward the mythic, we're going to be prose poems. Some of those prose poems I broke up into couplets because that was fun to do, and some are paragraph prose blocks. But that just felt like the way that I wanted to deal with that contemporary moment. The question about point of view and perspective is really interesting because I actually played with different versions. The Keshke series, I intentionally made them in the third person, and I do she, and I repeat she all the time, and I sort of pull it out on the page, and she is bracketed by like M dashes. So it's like she, like I wanted to be in your face with the mythic she. But again, writing about these sort of more immediate things, I wrote them in the she voice and it just felt off. And so I wrote them using different points of view, and I did what all of us writers do, right? You send them around to your circle of trusted feedback providers and you say like, hey, you know, which one of these sounds better to you? And so I did. I mean, I guess it's like a focus group, right? I shared them with a group of close people that I trust. And you know, ultimately the distancing of the second person felt like the best way to represent things that were happening to me that were super personal, but I couldn't claim with the first person voice. And so the you, right, is both a way of distancing yourself from the immediate, and it's also a way to kind of call out to your audience or your readership, right? So when you hear the you also feel like you're being addressed or brought into the text. And so I ended up going with that because I liked that dual nature of the sort of bringing in the reader while at the same time creating distance with the speaker. And I think that also plays into the kind of role of observation that some of those prose poems are taking, kind of commentary on, you know, what was going on politically, but also some things that were super intimate. Regardless, my mom's going to read this book and think it's all about me and then like call me a floozy. So I mean, doesn't matter what point of view I would have used, she's going to call me a floozy. Does that answer your question?
Well, I luckily was able to plug my cord in over here, so we're good to go. I just want to ask, are there other questions here? I have one question I'm interested in. Yeah, I really liked the integration of language. So the sort of almost discussion of grammar that was paralleling a lot of these, you know, national events and then intimate life story events. And plus again, the really neat repetition of Keshke throughout the pieces that you read tonight. I'm wondering how you're thinking about language and like also operating in this culture in another language, and how you decided to weave that into your artwork.
Oh, I love that question. So language is well, it's huge, right? I mean, as a writer, but I was also in a mode where I was really recommitting myself to studying Turkish language. I had made some attempts earlier and taken some classes. So I had signed up for this email, which every day sends you a new vocab word in Turkish. and it tells you which part of speech, and then it gives you a sample sentence. And it was called Turkish Word of the Day. And I don't know the people behind it, but I just started to notice that, you know, what the word that I would get every day would oftentimes have what I thought was a really interesting relationship to what was happening in my life and also in the country. And so as I was like growing my vocabulary through Turkish Word of the Day, I had to include them because it was just perfect, right? Also, when I went down to Olympos, I sort of immediately got into an environment where there was not much English spoken. So one person at the place where I stayed spoke English, but I mean, there were no foreign tourists there, right? And then certainly not in the weeks and months after the coup attempt. So I was surrounded entirely by Turkish people, and outside of Istanbul, most Turkish people do not speak English, especially down in the more rural areas. So, you know, and then once I found myself sort of having an affair with a boat captain and on a boat, his English, in retrospect, I mean, I imagine I remember us having all these great conversations, but his English wasn't great. So I don't remember how that happened, but, you know, we made it work. But, you know, being on a boat and being with the crew and, you know, these guys had a limited English vocabulary. And it was actually a really great moment for my Turkish because I started really sort of living in that language for a while. And so it made sense for that to come in. In the book, in the glossary, I offer translations of the Turkish words and phrases that I throw in there. But it was definitely a part of that experience of that moment for me, and part of the isolation of those moments after this, you know, this kind of disaster was, you know, not only a geographic isolation, but a linguistic one too. Where, yeah, the only English that I was hearing was music and like the voices in my head, you know.
Okay, last call for questions.
I think that now that she can hear us, we can give her a round.
We're going to give you a round of applause now. You can hear us.
Yay. Really, I mean, I just want to say again, like, it's such an indulgence and it's such a privilege to talk about yourself for any amount of time. And, you know, I know that all of us have so many things that we could choose to do with our time, especially our after work hours. And it really means a lot to me that you chose to spend some of that time with me. And thank you.
So what I'm going to do now is I'm going to turn the recording off. So again, thank you very much for being with us tonight. It was a great pleasure.
Thank you so much.